In the annals of American history, the Civil War stands as a monumental conflict that shaped the nation. While the Confederacy is often celebrated for its early military victories and indomitable spirit, the truth behind its ultimate defeat is far more complex and revealing. What if I told you that the reasons for their loss extend beyond the battlefield? Join us as we uncover the hidden facts that history often overlooks, elements that contributed to the downfall of the Confederate States of America. From logistical nightmares and strategic miscalculations to internal divisions and the evolving nature of warfare, these truths paint a more nuanced picture of why the Confederacy lost. But before we begin, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. As the Civil War erupted in 1861, the Confederacy experienced a series of impressive military victories that fostered a sense of invincibility among Southern leaders and soldiers alike. Battles like Bull Run and Fredericksburg showcased their tactical brilliance, leading many to believe that independence was within reach. However, this initial success created an illusion that would prove dangerous. The early victories were not indicative of sustainable strength. Rather, they masked deep-seated vulnerabilities that would later contribute to their downfall. The enthusiasm following these early battles led to overconfidence within Confederate ranks. Many believed that their cause was just and that foreign powers would soon recognize their independence. This belief was bolstered by initial successes on the battlefield, but it also blinded them to the realities of a protracted conflict. As the war dragged on, this overconfidence would turn into hubris, leading to critical miscalculations in strategy and resource allocation. One of the most significant factors in the Confederate defeat was their logistical shortcomings. The South was primarily agrarian, relying heavily on agriculture and slave labor. In stark contrast, the North boasted a robust industrial economy capable of producing vast quantities of arms, ammunition, and supplies. The Confederacy had approximately 9,000 miles of railroad compared to the North's 22,000 miles. This disparity severely hampered their ability to move troops and supplies efficiently. As battles dragged on and resources dwindled, the South struggled to maintain adequate supply lines. Union naval blockades effectively cut off vital supplies from reaching Confederate forces. The Anaconda Plan aimed to suffocate the Southern economy through naval blockades and control of key waterways. This strategy proved devastating as it limited Confederate access to essential resources and stifled morale. The lack of adequate transportation infrastructure became painfully apparent during critical campaigns. For example, during General Lee's Maryland campaign in 1862, his army faced significant delays due to poor rail connections and inadequate supplies. These logistical nightmares not only hampered military operations, but also eroded confidence among troops who were often underfed and poorly equipped. Additionally, as Union forces captured key transportation hubs such as New Orleans and Vicksburg, they further crippled Southern logistics. The loss of these strategic locations meant that Confederate forces could no longer effectively supply their armies or communicate across vast distances. While Confederate generals like Robert E. Lee demonstrated tactical brilliance in several battles, they often made strategic miscalculations that would prove costly. The South's early victories led many leaders to believe they could achieve a swift and decisive victory over the North. However, this overconfidence blinded them to the realities of a protracted war. Take the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863 as an example. Lee's decision to invade the North was a gamble that ultimately cost him dearly. He underestimated not only the strength and resolve of Union forces under General George Meade, but also failed to account for logistical challenges his own army would face during such an ambitious campaign. The three-day battle resulted in staggering casualties for both sides, but marked a turning point in favor of the Union. Additionally, Confederate leaders often failed to coordinate their strategies effectively. The lack of a unified command structure meant that decisions were frequently made in isolation without considering broader strategic implications. This disorganization contributed to missed opportunities and ineffective responses to Union advances. For instance, at the Battle of Chickamauga in September 1863, Confederate forces initially gained an advantage but failed to exploit it due to poor communication among commanders. Instead of pursuing a decisive victory against a retreating enemy, they allowed Union forces to regroup and counterattack effectively. Moreover, Southern leaders often underestimated Northern resolve and resources. They believed that prolonged conflict would lead to war weariness among Northerners. However, as casualties mounted on both sides, Northern resolve only strengthened with each passing battle. Another critical factor contributing to Confederate defeat was internal divisions within the South. While there was a strong sense of unity among many Southern citizens regarding their cause, primarily centered around states' rights and preserving slavery, this sentiment did not translate into cohesive governance or military strategy. President Jefferson Davis faced significant challenges in uniting various factions within the Confederacy. States' rights sentiments led many governors and local leaders to prioritize their own interests over those of the central government. This fragmentation hindered effective decision-making and coordination among military leaders. Conflicts between military commanders further exacerbated these divisions. For instance, disagreements between Davis and his generals regarding strategy often led to confusion and inefficiency on the battlefield. As morale waned due to mounting losses and resource shortages, these internal rifts became more pronounced. Moreover, as public sentiment shifted due to prolonged conflict and mounting casualties, dissent grew within Southern society itself. Families who had sent sons off to fight began questioning whether their sacrifices were worth it, as news from battlefronts turned grim. This growing discontent manifested in protests against conscription laws and calls for peace negotiations, a clear indication that unity was fraying at crucial moments when solidarity was paramount. The lack of strong leadership further compounded these issues. While Davis was dedicated, he struggled with political maneuvering necessary for effective governance during wartime. His inability to forge alliances or quell dissent within his ranks ultimately weakened Confederate resolve at critical junctures. Slavery was not only a moral issue, but also a practical one that affected military strategy throughout the war. The Confederacy's reliance on enslaved labor limited its ability to mobilize all available manpower for military service. While many Southern men fought bravely for their cause, significant numbers were tied up in agricultural production or other non-combat roles. Initially, Confederate leaders were hesitant to enlist black soldiers into their ranks due to fears about loyalty and potential rebellion among enslaved populations. It wasn't until late in the war that they recognized this potential resource. However, by then, it was too late to make a meaningful impact on their military fortunes. In contrast, as Union forces began enlisting black soldiers following President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, they gained not only additional manpower, but also moral legitimacy in their fight against slavery. This shift bolstered Northern resolve while further isolating the Confederacy internationally. The failure to utilize black soldiers effectively became increasingly evident as Union forces integrated them into combat roles with great success, demonstrating both their capability as soldiers and undermining Confederate claims about racial superiority. Furthermore, as Northern armies advanced into Southern territory, liberated enslaved people joined Union lines, providing critical intelligence about Confederate movements while simultaneously bolstering Northern ranks with eager fighters committed to ending slavery altogether. As time progressed, Union strategies evolved significantly in response to early setbacks and changing circumstances on the battlefield. Under leaders like Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman, they adopted aggressive tactics aimed at exhausting Confederate resources while simultaneously applying pressure on multiple fronts. The Union's ability to adapt its strategies was crucial in overcoming initial disadvantages. Grant's relentless pursuit of Lee's army during campaigns, such as those at Vicksburg and Petersburg, exemplified this evolution in strategy. By employing tactics that focused on attrition rather than decisive victories alone, Grant sought to wear down Confederate forces over time. Moreover, Sherman's famous March to the Sea demonstrated an innovative approach that targeted not only enemy troops, but also infrastructure and civilian resources supporting the war effort. By destroying railroads, factories, and supplies throughout Georgia and beyond, Sherman aimed to break Southern willpower while simultaneously depriving Confederate armies of essential resources. This shift towards total war fundamentally changed how conflicts were fought in America, prioritizing not just military objectives but also economic ones, effectively crippling Southern capacity for prolonged resistance. Union generals learned from past mistakes. They understood that victory required more than just winning battles. It necessitated dismantling enemy infrastructure while simultaneously demoralizing civilian populations, supporting those efforts militarily or economically. Several key battles throughout the Civil War served as turning points that shifted momentum decisively toward the Union cause. Vicksburg stands out as one such critical engagement. Its capture by Union forces in July 1863 effectively split the Confederacy in two along the Mississippi River. Simultaneously, Gettysburg marked not only a significant military defeat for Lee, but also a psychological blow for Southern morale. Following these two pivotal battles, it became increasingly clear that Confederate forces were struggling against overwhelming odds, both materially and strategically. As Northern troops continued their advances into Southern territory with increasing confidence and coordination, it became evident that time was running out for the Confederacy. Despite moments of brilliance from individual commanders like Lee or Stonewall Jackson earlier in the war, these victories could not compensate for systemic weaknesses within Confederate strategy or governance. Moreover, international dynamics played a role during this period. European powers such as Britain remained hesitant about recognizing or supporting an independent Confederacy due largely to concerns over slavery, a fundamental issue at odds with prevailing sentiments across Europe advocating abolitionist principles during this era. In retrospect, while military engagements defined much of Civil War history, the battles won or lost, the truth behind why the Confederacy ultimately fell lies deeper than mere battlefield outcomes. Logistical nightmares compounded by strategic miscalculations created insurmountable challenges for Southern leaders attempting to sustain their fight against an increasingly organized opponent. Internal divisions weakened resolve at critical moments when unity was paramount. Reliance on outdated tactics hampered effective responses. Failure adapt left them vulnerable as Union strategies evolved rapidly throughout conflict, all culminating into what can only be described as an inevitable collapse under pressure from relentless adversaries determined not just win, but ensure lasting change across America's landscape forevermore. Ultimately, understanding these hidden truths enriches our appreciation for this tumultuous period in American history, one where victory was never guaranteed despite early successes, and reminds us that wars are fought not just on battlefields, but also through logistics, politics, human willpower itself.